Sim Harris is here, managing editor of Rail News. Martin Tett is the chairman of the 51M Alliance, so-called because he says HS2 will cost each parliamentary constituency £51 million, money that could be much better spent elsewhere. He's also the Conservative leader of Buckinghamshire County Council. Welcome, gentlemen. Nice to see you both.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here.
Sim Harris, what's the most potent argument in favour?
I think the most potent argument in favour, and I must say that Rail News has taken a fairly central view on this. We didn't decide to campaign, come what may, for HS2. We're trying to ventilate the debate a bit. But the most potent argument in favour is quite simply this. To quote the Prince of Wales when he visited the depression-hit South Wales coalfields in the early 1930s, something must be done. We've got a railway system which is now busier, it is more popular, it is more demand-driven than ever. We're getting to record passenger figures. We're going back to the 1920s now, and there's no sign of that growth falling off. I know about the argument about telecommuting, about use of internet, Skype, all the rest of it. I do quite a lot of that myself. Nonetheless, the passenger figures speak for themselves. They're going up by 4% a year, and the existing West Coast main line from Euston up through the Midlands to the north is nearly full.
They're not going
now
up as quickly as they were, are they?
Well, there are some interesting arguments about exactly that because of the pressure on companies, operators, to actually pay compensation for late-running trains, a few extra minutes have been built in here and there. That's perfectly right. That, if you like, is an effect of the free market side of our somewhat hybrid, privatised, not privatised railway. However, the real point is this. The railway is nearly full, particularly that crucial main line from London to the Midlands and the North and Scotland. It was built, the first parts of it, 175 years ago. There is an argument that says we should upgrade it. Well, we tried that. It took a lot longer. It wasn't finished properly because they ran out of time and money, and now we are struggling to keep it going. And as David Higgins, the chief executive of Network Rail, says, the West Coast Main Line is being trashed. We're pounding it to bits. And if he had his way, he would close it for a couple of years to rebuild it. That is not an option. We need a new line.
OK, so it's a capacity argument that you've picked on. Martin Tett, what's the most potent argument against?
It was very interesting just hearing the capacity argument wheeled out again, because one of the factors on this whole project is the argument in favour sort of moves around. It's like a moving target in terms of trying to understand exactly what the main rationale for this is. Yesterday, the Department for Transport's public relations machine was in overdrive in terms of the claims that were being made for this project. If even a fraction of those were true, I think it would be quite a hard project to argue against. The reality is, as local authorities along the route, we've been taking a very serious look at this. I heard the lady earlier talking about her fields and whatever. I understand that. And to be honest with you, I care for that. But as local authorities, we're used to taking very hard decisions, sometimes very unpopular ones, to build infrastructure where local people don't want it. But when we do that, we actually have to make sure that there's a really good business case, because it's taxpayers' money that's being invested here, hard-pressed taxpayers' money in times like this, that therefore it's good value for money, that all of the alternatives have been looked at and dismissed, and it does something that's in the wider economic interests. Now, we've looked at HS2 in a lot of detail with substantial experts in the industry, and what you find very quickly is that this is incredibly poor value for hard-pressed taxpayers' money. The costs have already risen $2 billion in the last 12 months for the northern section that was announced yesterday. That was buried very deep within the announcement. You had to really search for that. So you can imagine what the costs will be when this thing finally gets built. They're talking about £33 billion worth of capital costs. Mm-hmm. If you add in the operating costs, that rockets quite substantially to nearly £60 billion. And there's going to be an ongoing taxpayer subsidy of something like £26 billion on this railway line. Now, if you're going to spend that amount of taxpayers' money, you have to make sure it does what it says on the tin.
Right, and if it does, as you say, what some of the government points would put forward, then you get back far more than you put in terms of jobs, what they call the benefit-cost ratio. The money coming back will be significantly higher than the money put in the long term.
Absolutely. And if that stood up to any reasonable critique, I think you'd be spot on. Just as a benchmark, I mean, most road schemes yield something like a 6-to-1 ratio. In other words, for every pound of taxpayers' money put in, you'll get something like £6 back. Some schemes even do 10-to-1. The reality on this scheme is it actually has a very poor return. It's less than 2, it's 1.9. And if you strip away some of the ludicrous assumptions that have gone into it. For example, a lot of the assumptions, 55% of the benefits, are because it's assumed that businessmen don't work on trains. Now, in the modern day and age, in the world of iPads, iPods, laptops and so on, most businessmen do work on trains.
Let me just deal with that one. Sim Harris, that is a point that the anti-campaign have made loud and clear, this idea that the time spent on a train is wasted time. It's not, is it?
No, I've been puzzled by that claim myself, I have to say. I don't agree with it. I think I work on trains. A lot of people do work on trains. I am not clear what the logic of that particular argument is, and if that's a point against high-speed rail, I concede it, because I don't think it's a good argument.
We had to Freedom of Information request to the Department of Transport, because they actually had 2 studies themselves which clearly demonstrated that the argument that people didn't work on trains was, in their own words, unsupportable and unsustainable.
What about the cost-benefit ratio, Sim Harris? That was a point that Martin Tett made, that we're not going to get as much back as it's claimed we're going to get back.
I would disagree that the capacity argument is a new one, that it has been wheeled out for the occasion. It's been there all along, and indeed it was the growth in railway use over the last 10 years that concentrated attention on what do we do now. There are, I suppose, 3 ways forward. We don't do anything, in which case the West Coast Main Line in particular will soon be full, and the growth particularly that's hoped for in rail freight just won't happen. We'll end up with a lot more lorries on the roads, pounding those very roads to pieces that Martin has been defending. We are all agreed we don't want more big lorries. Secondly, what if we instead simply try to upgrade the existing system? As I've already said, that does not work. We tried it. The railway as built is too old. It curves too much. There are too many long, expensive, small tunnels. I could go on, but it doesn't work. And no, you can't just widen the West Coast Main Line from Euston to Birmingham. How many houses would you have to knock down to do that? The third one is a new line, and a new line is either built to conventional standards, up to 125 miles an hour, or it's a high-speed line. The cost of making it high-speed is roughly 10% more. In that sense, it's a huge bargain.
Martin Tett, deal with that point about if you seek to improve what we have, you simply will not get a long-term fix here. We've tried it once, it was very disruptive, and look at the state of the line now.
Well, Sim's made 2 very good points. First of all, about capacity and then about alternatives. And they both deserve serious attention. When you look at the capacity issue, which is wheeled out, and it's a generic sort of statement about capacity that's used, you very rarely find numbers behind it. So we asked the Department for Transport to substantiate that statement. They refused to do so. Freedom of Information requests, again, were refused, but eventually, in the High Court, just about a month ago, they were forced to reveal their own official numbers for the capacity usage on the West Coast Main Line. And it shows that in peak period, the West Coast Main Line leaving Euston is only half full.
Well, that's because people are priced off the trains and they all travel on the one afterwards.
Full.
Martin, that is not right.
It is true.
No, it is not. You are talking about the Virgin intercity services. The London Midland suburban commuter services, London to Northampton and Birmingham, are up to 96% full on average. Many are severely overloaded now. There is no more room for services south of Birmingham. That's where we are.
Oh, are there pinch points south of Birmingham? Absolutely. You look at Milton Keynes and Northampton.
So how do you deal with those then?
And they need relieving now, not in 2025.
But what does relieving now mean in practice?
Basically, what we'd have to do, we'd take out some of the pinch points along that particular line, which you could do far more cheaply, far more quickly. That would relieve the suburban congestion.
Okay.
Don't need to spend $33 billion to do that. One of the issues that keeps coming up is this so-called north-south divide regeneration issue, which again is very dubious. We can come back to that in a minute.
Why is it dubious?
Well, can I just take the Meadowhall issue for a second? Take, for example, somebody who wants to get from, say, Derby to Sheffield on a journey, which is one of the things they promote on this project. At the moment, you can travel that line. But under the new scheme, you'd have to get from Derby to Totton Sidings. Then from Totton Sidings, you'd have to catch a train to Meadowhall. From Meadowhall, you then have to get a tram or some other service into Sheffield. So actually, you could end up taking more time with the new high-speed service than you would on the conventional line. So some of these things sound great in sound bites, but when you look at the detail behind it, they don't stack up.